I'm Avery, 38 female. I live in a city that prizes ambition, in a condo that I designed myself down to the last detail, a space that was once my sanctuary. As an interior designer, I built a successful business from scratch, pouring my soul into creating beautiful spaces for others. It was a life built on trust, in my clients, in my vision, and most of all, in my family. This is the story of how that trust was systematically dismantled by the two men I should have been able to count on the most, my husband and my own brother. They conspired to use my divorce, a moment of profound vulnerability, to try and bleed me dry, emotionally and financially. They thought their bond of greed was stronger than my will to survive, but they underestimated the clarity that comes from total betrayal. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The decision to end my 15-year marriage to Leo wasn't a single, explosive event. It was a slow erosion, a gradual drifting apart that had become impossible to ignore. The passion had faded into a comfortable but hollow routine. We were more business partners in life than romantic ones. Leo, a real estate developer, was charming, driven, and perpetually focused on the next big deal. I, with my design firm, was equally consumed by my work. We were a power couple on paper, our professional lives neatly complementing each other. But behind the closed doors of our minimalist, perfectly curated home, there was a quiet, cavernous emptiness. The final conversation was civil, almost clinical. We both agreed it was over. There were no tears, no shouting, just a sad, mutual acknowledgement that we had run our course. My immediate thought was of the logistics. Divorce is a messy, complicated process, and the thought of navigating it was daunting. We had significant shared assets: our home, investment properties Leo managed, my business, which had grown exponentially over the years, and a portfolio of stocks and savings. It was a life's work for both of us. That's when I made the call I thought was the most logical, the safest one I could make. I called my older brother, Julian. Julian was a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a partner at a prestigious downtown firm. He was 4 years older, and from the time we were kids, he had always positioned himself as my protector. He was the one who checked my homework, who vetted my boyfriends in high school, and who gave me the down payment for my first studio space. His approval had always been a benchmark for me. So when I called him, my voice trembling slightly, and asked if he would represent me, his response was immediate and reassuring. "Of course, Ave, don't you worry about a thing. I'll handle everything. I'll make sure you're protected." That word, protected, was a balm to my frayed nerves. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to tears. With Julian in my corner, I believed I could get through this with my dignity and my future intact. He knew our family, he knew my business, and he knew Leo. Who could possibly be a better advocate? The initial meeting was at his polished, mahogany-filled office. He laid out the strategy. He said that given our amicable split, we should aim for a swift and fair settlement. "The less we fight, the less we both lose to legal fees," he advised, his voice calm and authoritative. "Leo's a reasonable guy. I'll talk to his lawyer, and we'll hash out a separation agreement that works for everyone." He suggested that to simplify things, we should get a full accounting of our assets. He would work with Leo's team to compile everything. This included a valuation of my business, Avery Keen Designs. Julian suggested using an independent appraiser that his firm often worked with. "They're the best in the business," he said, "completely impartial. It's just to get a number on paper so we can divide things cleanly." I agreed without a second thought. Why would I question it? He was Julian, my brother, my protector. Every piece of advice he gave seemed sound, logical, and designed to minimize conflict and cost. He told me to focus on my work and my well-being, to let him handle the unpleasantness. And I did. I leaned on my best friend, Maya, who owned a bustling restaurant nearby. Over countless late-night cups of tea in her closed kitchen, I told her how grateful I was for Julian. "You're so lucky," she said. "Having a lawyer in the family you can actually trust, that's priceless." And I believed it was. The first draft of the separation agreement arrived a few weeks later. Julian walked me through it. It seemed straightforward. We would sell the marital home and split the proceeds. Savings would be divided. The trickier part was the business assets. Leo had several real estate holding companies, and I had my design FI. The valuation for my firm came back, and it was lower than I expected, significantly lower. I had just landed a major contract with a boutique hotel chain, a project that would double my firm's revenue over the next 2 years. "Julian, this seems off," I said, pointing to the number. "It doesn't seem to account for the new hotel contract or the projected growth." Julian leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Avery, valuations are based on current assets and past performance, not future projections. It's a snapshot in time. Projections are speculative. A judge would see it the same way. This is a solid, defensible number." He said it with such confidence that I felt foolish for questioning him. He was the expert, after all. He then pointed to a clause regarding Leo's real estate assets. It was dense with legal jargon, but he summarized it for me. Basically, many of his properties are tied up in LLCs with complex debt structures. Unwinding them would be a nightmare and cost a fortune in forensic accounting fees. Leo is offering you a lump sum payout from his personal portfolio in exchange for you waiving any claim to the business properties. It's a clean break, Ave. It's the smart move. A clean break, that's what I wanted. I was emotionally exhausted and just wanted to move on. The lump sum he mentioned seemed substantial enough. I was tired of feeling like every part of my life was under a microscope. I wanted to get back to my clients, my designs, my life. "Okay, Julian," I said, my voice heavy with resignation. "If you think this is fair, then I trust you." He smiled, a tight, professional smile. "I'm your brother. I will always look out for what's best for you." The trust I had in him was a foundation I had built my entire life on. It was as solid and real as the ground beneath my feet. I had no idea it was nothing but sand, and the tide was about to come in. The weeks following my agreement to the initial terms were a strange limbo. Leo had moved out into a corporate apartment downtown, and the silence in our condo was deafening. I threw myself into work, finding solace in fabric swatches and lighting plans. It was my way of controlling a small piece of my world while the larger structure of my life was being dismantled. Julian assured me the paperwork was progressing smoothly. He said he was in regular contact with Leo's lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, and that they were just finalizing the details. "Almost there, Ave. Just a few more signatures and this will all be behind you," he'd say during our brief phone calls. The first real crack in my confidence appeared subtly. I needed a document from my business's incorporation, a small detail for a new insurance policy. I called Julian's office, expecting his paralegal to email it over. Instead, Julian himself called me back, his tones slightly strained. "Hey, I have that file here at my office. Why don't you just let me handle the insurance broker? No need for you to get bogged down in paperwork." It was an odd response. He was usually keen to delegate such minor tasks. "It's no trouble, Julian. I can just swing by and pick it up," I offered. There was a pause. "It's just everything is bundled together for the divorce proceedings. It would be a hassle to pull it apart right now. Let me handle it. It's what you're paying me for, right?" He ended with a little laugh, but it didn't sound genuine. I let it go, but a small, nagging feeling of unease settled in my stomach. Why would he be so protective of a simple incorporation document? A week later, I had lunch with Maya. She was a whirlwind of energy, her hands still dusted with flour from the morning's baking. She listened patiently as I recounted the strange call with Julian. Maya, ever the pragmatist, frowned. "That is weird, Avery. It's your document. Why would it be a hassle?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "And what about this appraiser he used? Did you ever see their full report or just the final number?" I thought back. Julian had just shown me the summary page with the valuation figure. He said the full report was dozens of pages of financial modeling and not worth my time. "No, just the final number," I admitted. Maya's frown deepened. "And Leo's lawyer, this Davies guy, have you ever spoken to him or even seen an email from him?" I realized with a jolt that I hadn't. All communication had been filtered through Julian. He always said he was handling it. That conversation stayed with me. I started paying closer attention. The next time I spoke to Julian, I casually asked for a copy of the appraiser's full report for my records. "Oh, it's all in the official discovery file, Ave. It's just boilerplate stuff. You don't need to worry about it," he said, deflecting again. His excuses were starting to sound thin, like a blanket that was too small to cover the truth. He was actively keeping me away from the details, framing it as protection, but it was beginning to fee. Like concealment, the unease grew into a knot of genuine anxiety. The breaking point came in the form of a misdirected email. It was late on a Friday evening. I was working at my desk, trying to finalize a design for a client when a notification pinged. The email was from Leo. The subject line was "Ray, final numbers." My heart skipped a beat. Why was he emailing me directly? We had agreed to communicate only through our lawyers, but as I opened it, I realized it wasn't meant for me. In the to field was a single recipient, Julian. My email address was in the BCC field, almost certainly added by mistake. The message was short and chilling. "Julian, Davies is on board with the revised asset schedule. He agrees the hotel contract is speculative and won't be an issue. Good work keeping her focused on the lump sum. Let's get this signed before she starts asking more questions. Drinks next week to celebrate." I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words blurred together. Good work keeping her focused on the lump sum before she starts asking more questions. And then the sender, Leo. Not Leo's lawyer, Leo himself. Writing to my brother, Julian, they weren't communicating through their lawyers, they were communicating directly. And the tone wasn't adversarial. It was collaborative. They sounded like partners. My blood ran cold. The air in my perfectly designed office suddenly felt thin and sharp. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. The strange phone calls, the withheld documents, the lowball valuation, it all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. This wasn't a divorce negotiation. It was a coordinated effort. My brother, my protector, was working with my soon-to-be ex-husband. A fog of disbelief and betrayal enveloped me. I thought of all the times Julian had said, "I'll protect you." He wasn't protecting me. He was managing me. He was handling me for Leo. The foundation of trust I had built my life on hadn't just developed a crack. It had shattered into a million pieces. For a long moment, I just sat there, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, the treacherous words burning into my memory. The silence of the condo was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of my own quiet, ragged breathing, and the dawning of a terrible, undeniable truth. For 2 days, I was paralyzed. The email felt like a physical blow, leaving me winded and disoriented. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I just reread the words over and over, each time feeling a fresh wave of sickness wash over me. Julian and Leo, my brother and my husband. The two central male figures in my life colluding behind my back. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply personal, it felt like it had been injected directly into my bloodstream. My first instinct was to call Julian and scream at him, to forward the email to him and demand an explanation. But some deeper, colder part of me held me back. They thought I was naive. They thought I was so wrapped up in my grief and my work that I wouldn't notice the details. A direct confrontation would only make them close ranks and cover their tracks more effectively. They had the legal expertise, the financial acumen. I had a gut-wrenching email and a growing sense of dread. On the third morning, the paralysis gave way to a slow-burning anger. It started as a spark in the pit of my stomach and gradually spread, warming my cold limbs. They had mistaken my trust for weakness. They had mistaken my desire for a peaceful resolution for ignorance. That was a mistake they were going to regret. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof that went beyond a single misdirected email that they could easily dismiss as a misunderstanding. I needed to understand the full scope of their deception before I made a single move. My mind raced back to Julian's strange behavior, his reluctance to share documents. The valuation report. The business incorporation papers. He was hiding something in the paperwork. I was certain of it. Getting those documents was now my singular focus. I couldn't ask Julian directly. I needed another way. I remembered that when I first incorporated my business, I had used a small, local accounting firm to handle the initial setup before I grew big enough to need a larger team. They were a family-run business, meticulously organized. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, they would have a copy of the original incorporation files. I found their number and called, my heart pounding. A pleasant woman answered, and I explained the situation, saying I had misplaced my copy. She told me it would take some time to check their archives. For the next hour, I paced my apartment, waiting for her to call back. When the phone finally rang, I snatched it up. "Mrs. Keene, we found it," she said. "We have your full incorporation package from 10 years ago. I can have a courier send it over this afternoon." The relief was so intense my knees felt weak. "Okay." When the package arrived, I tore it open. Inside was a thick file containing the articles of incorporation, shareholder agreements, and initial financial statements. I wasn't a lawyer or an accountant, but I had run my own business for a decade. I knew my way around a balance sheet. I spread the documents across my dining room table, the same table where I had hosted so many family dinners with Julian and Leo. At the back of the file, I found what I was looking for, the initial shareholder registry. And there it was in black and white. When I founded Avery Keene Designs, I was the majority shareholder with 90% of the shares. The other 10%, I had gifted them to Julian. It was a gesture of gratitude for his help with the down payment and his early legal advice. I remember him being so touched, saying it was a testament to our bond. Over the years, I had completely forgotten about it. It was a small, symbolic stake in my success, or so I had thought. My eyes scanned the document, and then I saw it. A clause I had never paid attention to, buried in the legalese of the shareholder agreement. It was a right of first refusal clause, but with a unique and insidious addition. It stated that if the company were to be valued as part of a marital dissolution, any shareholder with a legal background had the right to oversee the appointment of the business appraiser. Julian hadn't just suggested an appraiser his firm worked with. Our founding documents gave him the right to do so. He had presented it as a helpful choice when, in fact, it was his contractual right. A right he had never mentioned. A right he was now exploiting to control the valuation of my life's work. This was not a simple conflict of interest. This was premeditated. He had built this leverage into the very foundation of my company 10 years ago. The anger I felt was crystalline in its purity. This wasn't a recent betrayal born of opportunity. The seeds of this deception had been planted a decade ago. He had sat at my table, celebrated my successes, and all the while, he held this hidden card. The misdirected email was the symptom. This document was the disease. This was proof of a conflict of interest so profound it would be impossible to ignore. A lawyer cannot represent a client in a negotiation where he himself has a direct financial stake and a contractual power that affects the outcome. He was not my representative. He was a third party in the negotiation, secretly aligned with my adversary. I carefully scanned the document into my computer and saved it to a secure cloud drive. I then took the original and placed it in a safe deposit box at my bank the next morning. This was my weapon. This document, combined with Leo's email, was the key. They had built a cage of legal and financial complexities around me, but they had left the blueprint lying around. I finally understood the full picture. Julian would use his power to appoint a friendly appraiser to undervalue my business. Leo would then get my company's assets, my client list, my brand, my future earnings, for a fraction of their true worth, all wrapped up in a clean break lump sum payment. And Julian? His 10% stake would suddenly become much more valuable once the business was in Leo's hands, free from the divorce proceedings and ready to profit from the massive hotel contract. It was a perfect, diabolical plan, and I had almost signed it away. But now I had the one thing they never expected me to find. I had the truth, and with it, I was going to dismantle their entire world. Armed with the shareholder agreement and Leo's incriminating email, I knew my next steps couldn't be guided by emotion. I needed a new kind of expert, someone who wasn't just a lawyer, but a hunter. Someone who could navigate the murky waters of financial deception and expose every hidden detail of Julian and Leo's scheme. My best friend, Maya, who had seen her fair share of shady business partners in the restaurant industry, knew exactly who to call. "You don't just need a new lawyer, Avery," she said, her voice firm over the phone. "You need a forensic accountant, someone who lives to find needles in haystacks of money. I know a woman. Her name is Nina Sharma. She's a genius." Meeting Nina was like a jolt of caffeine after a week of sleepless nights. She was in her early 30s, sharp, energetic, and her office was a minimalist space, a stark contrast to Julian's opulent, wood-paneled corner office. There was no pretense with Nina. I laid out the story, my voice shaking at first, then steadying as I presented the email and the shareholder agreement. I watched her as she read, her eyes scanning the pages with an unnerving intensity. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. When she finished, she looked up at me, a small, grim smile on her face. "Well, your brother is either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid to put himself in a position of such clear-cut conflict of interest," she said, her voice cry. "SB, and your husband is sloppy. BCCing you was a gift, let's not waste it." Nina's confidence was infectious. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. She explained her process. She would work in the background, conducting a deep dive into every financial record she could get her hands on. "They've built a narrative based on lies and omissions," she explained, tapping the valuation summary Julian had given me. "Our job is to build a counter-narrative based on irrefutable facts. We follow the money. It never lies." The first step was to discreetly gain access to financial records without tipping off Julian and Leo. Nina guided me on how to legally request my own financial statements, bank records, and credit card histories under the guise of routine financial planning. For the business records, it was trickier. Julian, as my lawyer, had control of the official divorce file, but I, as the business owner, had access to my company's internal bookkeeping software. For years, I had let my office manager handle it, only reviewing the high-level reports. Now, with Nina guiding me, I spent nights poring over years of transactions, invoices, and payment records. Nina started connecting the dots. She focused on the business appraiser Julian had appointed. His name was Arthur Croft. On the surface, his firm was reputable, but Nina dug deeper. She ran a cross-check of Croft's business dealings against Leo's network of LLCs, and there it was, a small but significant link. 2 years prior, Croft's firm had provided the valuation for a commercial property that one of Leo's shell companies was purchasing. The valuation was suspiciously low, allowing Leo's company to acquire the property at a fantastic price. It wasn't illegal, but it established a pattern. Croft had a history of providing favorable valuations for Leo's interests. Next, Nina turned her attention to Julian. She analyzed his personal finances, which I had access to from old joint family investment accounts we had once shared. She discovered something interesting. 6 months ago, just around the time Leo and I had started seriously discussing separation, Julian had paid off a substantial personal loan, a loan he had taken out for a lavish home renovation. The source of the payment was a one-time wire transfer. The amount was exactly $75,000. "A big, round number like that is always a red flag," Nina noted. "People paying off debts use precise amounts. Big, clean numbers often signify something else." The source of the wire was a holding company. When Nina cross-referenced the company name with public records, her eyes lit up. The holding company was registered to a managing partner at Mr. Davies' law firm, Leo's lawyer. It was a thinly veiled kickback. Leo had funneled $75,000 through his lawyer's firm to my brother. It was likely an advance, a sign of good faith for the work Julian was about to do, ensuring the divorce settlement heavily favored Leo. The final piece of the puzzle was the most devastating. Nina, using the business records I had pulled, began to reconstruct a true, honest valuation of my company. She factored in the new hotel contract, my stellar reputation, and the pipeline of future projects I had been developing. She also analyzed my client list and the contracts associated with it. As she did, she uncovered a series of small, strange invoices from a consulting firm I had never heard of. The payments were for strategic consulting, authorized and coded into the system by our longtime office manager. When I called him, he was defensive at first, but under the weight of my direct questions, his story crumbled. He admitted that Julian had instructed him to make the payments, saying they were for divorce-related legal strategy. Nina investigated the consulting firm. It was a shell company, and its sole proprietor, Julian's wife. My brother had been using my own business's money to pay his wife through a sham consulting firm, effectively stealing from me to fund his own household, all under the guise of helping me. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just colluding with Leo, he was actively siphoning funds from the very asset he was pretending to protect. Nina compiled everything into a meticulously organized report: the link between Leo and the appraiser, the $75,000 payment to Julian, the shareholder agreement highlighting the conflict of interest, and the fraudulent invoices to his wife's shell company. She laid the thick binder on her desk in front of me. "There it is," she said. "The full story. Not just a conflict of interest or a shady deal, but a pattern of conspiracy and fraud. They didn't just want to cheat you in a divorce. They were actively stealing from you." Looking at the binder, at the cold, hard proof of their treachery, my anger solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. They had wanted to strip me of my assets. Now I was going to strip them of everything: their careers, their reputations, and their freedom. With Nina's binder of evidence, I finally had the ammunition I needed. But Nina cautioned me against a premature attack. "A cornered animal is dangerous," she warned. "If you confront them now, they will use every legal trick to bury this evidence in motions and delays. We don't want a long, drawn-out war. We want a swift, public execution." Her words were stark, but they resonated with the cold fury that had taken root inside me. She recommended a lawyer, not a bulldog litigator, but a strategist. A woman named Evelyn Reed, who specialized in legal ethics and professional misconduct. Evelyn was in her 60s, with a calm demeanor that concealed a mind like a steel trap. She reviewed Nina's report in silence, her expression unreadable. When she was done, she closed the binder and looked at me over the top of her glasses. "This is not just a divorce case anymore, Ms. Keene," she said, her voice measured. "This is a civil conspiracy and fraud case. More importantly, it's grounds for your brother's disbarment." The State Bar Association takes a very dim view of lawyers defrauding clients, especially when that client is family. Our plan was multifaceted, designed not just to win, but to annihilate their defenses before they even knew they were under attack. Evelyn explained the strategy. We would let them walk right into the trap they had set for me. The first step was to play along. I had to continue acting like the oblivious, trusting sister and wife. I called Julian, forcing a note of weary resignation into my voice. "Julian, I've been thinking," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You're right. I'm tired of fighting. I just want this to be over. Let's sign the agreement as it is." On the other end of the line, I could almost hear the triumphant smirk in his voice. "I think that's a wise decision, Avery," he said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "It's for the best. You need to start healing." The hypocrisy was so thick I nearly choked on it. He confirmed that a final signing meeting could be scheduled with the mediator for the following week. With the meeting on the calendar, Nina and Evelyn moved to the next phase. Evelyn drafted a formal complaint to the State Bar, a meticulously detailed document outlining Julian's every transgression: the undisclosed conflict of interest, the fraudulent invoices, the conspiracy with opposing interests, and the kickback from Leo. It was a career-ending document. However, she didn't file it. Not yet. She held it, a guillotine waiting to be dropped. Meanwhile, Nina prepared a separate, comprehensive financial report. This wasn't just a new valuation of my business. It was a full forensic analysis of the conspiracy. It detailed the money trail from Leo to Julian, the fraudulent billing, and a revised, honest accounting of the marital assets. It showed that the proposed settlement wasn't just unfair. It was a theft of several $1,000,000. This report was our bombshell for the civil case. The final piece of the plan was the most personal. I spent the weekend going through old family photos, boxes of memories I kept in storage. I found pictures of Julian and me as kids, him with his arm around me, grinning protectively. Photos from my wedding, with Julian giving a heartfelt speech about integrity and family. I scanned them, along with copies of every heartfelt birthday card he'd ever sent me, every email praising my success. I was building a psychological file, a portrait of the man he pretended to be, which would stand in stark contrast to the man he actually was. The day of the mediation arrived. It was held in a neutral conference room downtown. I walked in, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Leo was there, looking relaxed and confident, giving me a small, pitying smile. Julian sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Don't worry, Avery, I'm here. It will be over soon," he whispered. The mediator, an older gentleman, began the proceedings. He reviewed the settlement agreement, the one that would have financially crippled me, and asked if both parties understood and agreed to the terms. Leo and his lawyer immediately affirmed their consent. The mediator then turned to me. "Ms. Keene," this was the moment. I took a deep breath, drawing strength from the months of pain and anger. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I do not agree to these terms. In fact, I'm here today to reject this fraudulent document and present a new one." A flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face. Leo stiffened. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 3 thick, spiral-bound documents. I slid one across the table to Leo and his lawyer. I slid the second one to the mediator. And the third, I placed directly in front of my brother. It was Nina's full forensic report. "What is this, Avery?" Julian asked, his voice losing its smooth edge. "This is my counteroffer," I said, my eyes locked on his. "It's a full accounting of the marital assets, including the true valuation of my business and a detailed analysis of the conspiracy you and Leo engineered to defraud me." Leo's face went pale. His lawyer started flipping through the pages, his eyes widening with each one. Julian stared at the cover, frozen. "And Julian," I continued, my voice dropping to an icy calm, "for you, I have something else." I pulled out another document and placed it on top of his report. It was the cover page of Evelyn's complaint to the state bar. "That is a courtesy copy of a complaint that will be filed by the end of business today unless a new, equitable settlement is reached. It details your conflict of interest, the kickback you took from Leo, and the money you stole from my company through your wife's shell corporation." The color drained from Julian's face. He looked at me, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief. The mask of the protective older brother was gone, replaced by the terrified face of a man whose world was collapsing around him. The trap had been sprung. The room was silent, the air thick with the stench of their exposed lies. There would be no easy signing, no quiet victory for them. There was only the evidence, cold and irrefutable, and the beginning of their reckoning. The conference room, once a stage for their victory, instantly transformed into a pressure cooker. The silence was broken by Leo's lawyer, Mr. Davies, who, after a frantic skim of the report, immediately requested a private moment with his client. The mediator, looking stunned but professional, nodded and gestured for them to use an adjoining room. As they scurried out, Leo shot me a look of pure venom, a desperate fury replacing his earlier smugness. That left just me and Julian at the long, polished table. The space between us felt like a chasm. He stared at the complaint cover page, his hands trembling slightly. He wouldn't look at me. The man who had been my lifelong protector, my confidant, was reduced to a cornered criminal. "Avery," he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "How could you?" The audacity of the question, the attempt to cast himself as the victim, was so pathetic it was almost laughable. My cold fury held firm. "How could I?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "How could you sit across from me for months, telling me you were protecting me? How could you take money from my husband to strip mine my life's work? How could you use my own company's funds to pay your wife for doing nothing? You didn't just betray a client, Julian. You betrayed your sister. You betrayed every memory we ever had." I pulled out the small stack of photos I had brought and spread them on the table between us. A picture of him holding my hand on my first day of school. A photo of us laughing at a family holiday. "This is who I thought you were," I said quietly. "But this," I tapped the complaint, "this is who you are now." He finally looked up, his eyes swimming with a mixture of terror and a sickening self-pity. He saw no escape. The evidence was too complete, too damning. The forensic report exposed the civil conspiracy, and the bar complaint would end his career and possibly lead to criminal charges. We had him, and he knew it. When Leo and Davies returned, their demeanor had completely changed. The bravado was gone. Davies, a man clearly desperate to distance himself from his client's fraudulent activity and the potential fallout on his own firm, spoke in a clipped, formal tone. "My client is prepared to discuss a new settlement," he said, avoiding eye contact with me. My lawyer, Evelyn, who had been waiting in the lobby and entered at my signal, took her seat beside me. "There is very little to discuss," Evelyn stated calmly. "Ms. Keene will be granted sole ownership of her business, free and clear of any claims. She will receive the marital home and its contents. She will receive 70% of all liquid assets and investment accounts. Mr. Keene will assume all marital debts. This is not a negotiation." Davies began to protest, but Leo, looking utterly broken, placed a hand on his lawyer's arm. "Just do it," he muttered. He knew he was trapped. Fighting would mean Nina's report would become public record in a court filing. The details of his conspiracy, his bribery, and his fraud would be exposed for the world, and his investors to see. His reputation as a developer would be ruined. For him, a quiet, financially devastating surrender was infinitely better than a public execution. The focus then shifted to Julian. Evelyn addressed him directly. "As for you, Mr. Keene," she said, her voice like ice, "my client has agreed to hold the filing of the bar complaint for 24 hours, pending your full and complete cooperation." His head snapped up, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. "First," Evelyn continued, "you will sign a binding affidavit, a full confession detailing your role in this conspiracy, your conflict of interest, and the financial arrangement you made with Mr. Keene. This document will serve as our insurance. Second, you will immediately return the full value of your 10% stake in Avery Keene Designs to my client. You will relinquish all shares and any claim, now and forever. Third, you will repay every dollar you funneled to your wife's shell company, plus interest and penalties." Julian looked at me, a silent plea in his eyes. I gave him nothing. I just stared back, my expression unyielding. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, propped up by his reputation and his law degree. We were about to take it all away. He slumped in his chair, the fight completely gone. "I agree," he whispered. Over the next few hours, new documents were drafted. Leo signed away the house, the savings, and his claim to my business. His signature was a spidery, hesitant scrawl, the mark of a defeated man. Julian dictated his confession to a stenographer Evelyn had on standby, every word an admission of his own destruction. He signed the documents relinquishing his shares and agreeing to the repayment plan. It was a complete and total capitulation. They had walked into the room expecting to finalize their theft. They walked out stripped of their assets, their dignity, and their futures. The judgment I had sought wasn't delivered by a judge in a courtroom. It was delivered by me, in that silent conference room, with nothing but the truth as my gavel. The days immediately following the mediation were surreal. The transfer of assets happened with a speed that could only be motivated by pure terror. The title for the house was in my name within a week. The funds appeared in my new, private bank account. The paperwork confirming my sole ownership of my company was filed and finalized. Leo disappeared from my life like a ghost, retreating to whatever was left of his shattered business empire. I heard through the grapevine that the fallout from the divorce had spooked his investors, and several of his major projects were now in jeopardy. He had tried to take my future, and in the process, he had torched his own. The most difficult part was Julian. As promised, Evelyn held the bar complaint. 2 days after the mediation, a cashier's check arrived via courier for the full amount he had stolen through the fake consulting firm, plus the penalties Evelyn had calculated. Another package contained the signed stock transfer certificate, his 10% stake in my company reduced to a worthless piece of paper. The final document was his signed confession, a copy of which was now securely in Evelyn's possession. He had met our terms. The question was, what now? Evelyn laid out my options. "We can still file the complaint," she said. "His confession guarantees his disbarment. It could also trigger a criminal investigation. Or we can hold this over his head for the rest of his life. It's your call, Avery. I thought about it for a long time. My initial impulse was to burn it all down, to make him pay the ultimate professional price for his betrayal. I imagined him being publicly shamed, his name struck from the roll of attorneys. Part of me craved that final, absolute victory. But then I thought about my parents. They were retired in their late 60s and they adored Julian. He was their golden boy, the successful lawyer. The truth of what he had done would utterly destroy them. It would shatter their peace in their final years, and for what? My revenge was already complete. He was broken. I had his confession. He would live every single day for the rest of his life knowing that I held the key to his entire career, that with one phone call, I could end it all. He would have to look at me at every family gathering, at every holiday, and know that I knew the truth of his rotten core. The power wasn't in his destruction, but in my control over his fate. I made my decision. I met Julian for the last time. Not in an office, but on a neutral park bench on a cold, gray afternoon. He looked older, diminished. "I'm not going to file it," I said without preamble. A flicker of relief washed over his face, but it vanished when I continued. "But I am keeping the confession. And if you ever, for 1 second, step out of line, if you ever so much as lie to our parents about why you and I are no longer close, I will file it without hesitation. You will be polite, you will be cordial, but you and I are done. You are no longer my brother." I stood up and walked away without looking back, leaving him alone on the bench. The hold he had over me was broken, and in its place, I had forged a chain around him that he would wear forever. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I legally changed my name back to my maiden name and rebranded my company, pouring my renewed energy into my work. The boutique hotel project was a massive success, and my firm's reputation soared. I hired 2 new talented designers and moved into a larger, sunnier studio space. The condo, once a symbol of a hollow marriage, became my sanctuary again. I filled it with new art, with laughter from friends like Maya, and with the quiet, profound peace of my own company. I learned that true strength isn't just about fighting back, it's about knowing how to heal. It's about taking the rubble of a life that's been demolished and using it to build a stronger foundation. Leo and Julian tried to take everything from me, believing I was just a component of their financial lives to be liquidated. But they never understood that my true assets were never on a balance sheet. They were my creativity, my resilience, and my integrity. And those were things they could never touch. I rose from the ashes of their betrayal, not scorched, but forged. And in the quiet moments, when I look around at the life I have built for myself, on my own terms, I know that this is the best revenge of all. Not just surviving, but thriving.